Well, welcome everybody. It's great to be speaking today with Katie Phang, who is an independent journalist, a trial lawyer, and also host of the Katie Phang News channel. Katie, so good to talk to you. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, no, David, thanks for having me. And I was saying before you and I hit that live button, it's overdue. It's long overdue for you and I to hang out.
Very much overdue. Very much overdue. Tell me, the transition from legacy and corporate media to independent journalism. What's the good, the bad, and the ugly? Like what's been great, but also like what are some of the differences that maybe are challenges in making the transition?
I think for most people, my immediate response on the spectrum of ugly would be kind of the lack of a consistent paycheck, right? I think a lot of us equate success professionally as I am a W 2 employee and I get a paycheck every 2 weeks and this is what it is. And that's good. And the predictability is very reassuring. But going to the other end of that spectrum of what is great, even though there may be this uncertainty that you don't work for corporate media, big, company anymore. I can now chase down what I think is important. And for me, I think a lot of things are important and I have a lot of different interests. And the fact that I get to lean into all of the things I think that makes me who I am, and I don't have somebody either judging it or telling me to watch your tone, which I got a lot of when I was in mainstream media. I can just be who I am, and I literally am what you see here is what you would get if you were hanging out in my living room, which happens sometimes when I do join from my home. The other kind of cool thing is that, especially here at Substack, there's no judgment, right? Like, we come, we hang out, we talk, we share our thoughts, not always agreeing. It sounds like a family, in my opinion. It sounds like Thanksgiving dinner. And so I love that because I'm also learning so much from other people in being able to do stuff on an independent media platform. And then I think the final part of my answer is I would never have been able to sue Todd Blanche if I had still been in my traditional role in mainstream media. And so that really is the most kind of freeing option to be able to chase down, again, the things that I think are incredibly important for not only me, but for the public at large.
One of the things you've spent time investigating and reporting on is the Epstein files. And I was reading, I don't remember if it was one of your Substack posts or maybe it was an interview you did where you said that you believe even the redactions from the most recent slate of files, that those redactions shouldn't have been done, that those are illegally done and they're not in compliance with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Can you explain why that's your belief?
Because we cannot believe, which is just galling in and of itself, our Department of Justice anymore. Any presumption of regularity, which is a phrase you hear often used by me and other lawyers and legal analysts, especially, on when we have discussions about what is happening in our country right now. There used to be a time when, frankly, any lawyer understanding what their oath is. Um, and what their professional responsibilities and their ethical duties are, if they said something, you would presume that that was accurate and true. But we know that the Department of Justice has been weaponized in a way to serve only one client, and that's not the United States and its people, it's Donald Trump. So anything that has been released by the DOJ empirically has been shown to either been done improperly or illegally. And part of my lawsuit is a special master appointment. Why? Because we need somebody who can actually call balls and strikes here and can actually hold to account the Department of Justice when they make a representation. It's not for me to litmus test the truth. It's for a special master to come in, especially because a judge is never going to have a time to go through all of the documentation, but a special master could. And they've used special masters in those capacities before with voluminous documents in big cases. And the same thing would apply here. A representation is made by the Department of Justice. A special master would sit there and in the privacy of that special master's, world, they would test that credibility by determining whether or not it was supposed to be redacted or not, and then they would make a report and finding to the court. And it's amazing because I've been telling people, David, I only want the Department of Justice to follow the law. I'm not asking for anything more than that. And I'm also not going to take anything less because you and I have to follow the law. So why shouldn't the Department of Justice, specifically Todd Blanche, have to do the same?
Is there any justification for redacting names of alleged perpetrators? Because my reading of the legislation was redactions to protect the identity of victims, but I didn't see anything in there about protecting alleged perpetrators, even if it's some of these documents are really just allegations. It's authorities interviewed someone. Someone said something. There's the yacht story from off of Lake Michigan. There's the nipple story. These are allegations, but I didn't see anything in the legislation that said that the names of potential or alleged perpetrators can be redacted. Would there be any legal basis for that part?
No, in fact, in the Epstein Files Transparency Act, it explicitly does not allow to spare somebody from public humiliation or embarrassment just because their name appears. And let me be clear, there are some pretty wild and outrageous allegations that are currently existing in the version of the DOJ files that have been released so far.
Yep.
My job is not to be law enforcement. In fact, the FBI and the DOJ and other various law enforcement agencies have failed victims and survivors over the span of decades when it comes to this particular issue. But no, I'm not. I'm not here to be judge, jury, and executioner. I'm just here to say, let it all out and let other people either chase investigative leads, including law enforcement if they're not time barred anymore, or let people in the public use their critical thinking skills to be able to do so. This gray area that has now been created by the Department of Justice recently in my lawsuit and their latest response is Blanche says, I am still protecting the identities of victims and survivors in some of these redactions, and that's the reason why I'm not doing it. And there is a subset of people that are in the files about whom we already know that were either recruited, brought in, were victims, were groomed, and then they themselves became abusers, recruiters, groomers, or perpetrators themselves. Again, I'm not here to judge the credibility of somebody claiming that they began their journey in Epstein's orbit as a victim. But I believe that that is what Blanche is hiding behind. And so I don't want to impute any nobility or integrity to what Blanche is doing here. I just think he's looking for a convenient scapegoat kind of label he can tack on to this stuff as an excuse as to why he's not turning things over.
One of the things we've seen is that since the start of the Iran war, the search interest in Epstein stuff has just declined. And people can verify this on their own. You can go to Google Trends and type in Epstein files. You'll see it for yourself. I don't think that that was a calculation. I don't think Trump said, "Hey, I want to take attention off of Epstein. Let me start a war." I think his reasons for starting the war were terrible, but they were different. One of the things I'm wondering though is, do you think that what needs to happen for the Epstein files to be back in the news the way they were, I guess is my question. Because at this point, I don't think that if the Iran war does wind down all of a sudden, that the Epstein files come back as a point of central interest. I think that it is diminished for a number of reasons. What would it take to bring it back?
Well, I think Trump is a beneficiary, though,
Yes.
of our attention being distracted from the Epstein files. And I have said repeatedly that I think the Epstein files themselves are the Achilles heel for Donald Trump and much of this administration. Um, it is my pursuit of always having it be top of public discourse, and the reason isn't the horrific nature or any type of seedy nature of what we're reading and what we're learning as we learn more. It speaks to the bigger picture of corruption, and it speaks to the bigger picture of inequity and inequality, and a phrase that's elite impunity is one that I've kind of like latched onto recently. This double standard that applies, that is a huge kind of brand for the current administration, and it's something that we've seen happen historically. But I think the people have now said we don't want to deal with this anymore. We actually want to make sure that right means right because it's been perverted along the way. And so part of what we do is, I at least always continue to amplify the stories of survivors and victims, and not even just in the Epstein orbit, people that have been victims of sex trafficking or any other type of abuse. I also believe that my lawsuit has always been garnering and continues to garner attention because I'm not suing Trump and I'm not suing the Department of Justice. I'm suing a man called Todd Blanche, who next week is going to go before Senate Judiciary because he wants the permanent job of being the most powerful law enforcement officer in our country. It's what's important for people to remember is Donald Trump can be a horrible person in and of himself, but he cannot go and investigate somebody. He has to weaponize the Department of Justice and perhaps arms like the FBI and others to be able to do so. That's why he needs somebody like Todd Blanche. So the more that we talk about the weaponization of a federal agency and the risk of putting it in the hands of someone like Todd Blanche, and the more that I can talk about why that he doesn't have the integrity to be able to run that federal agency, especially when you consider what he's done with the Epstein files, we can always kind of make it come home to roost on these central concepts of corruption and power inequality.
What do you make of the current state of the Supreme Court in the middle of all of this? Because in the aftermath of the decisions last week, there were some decisions that I guess you could say I, as a layperson, agree with, and some decisions that I disagree with. Fine. But even in the ones that I guess you could say went my way, the fact that there are justices willing to, for example, say, no, Trump can completely change the meaning of the 14th Amendment, for example. Like, the
Yes.
right decision ultimately was reached. But there are these three justices, potentially four on different grounds, if you can include Roberts, who would have been happy to say, yeah, one of the pillars that this country was built on, we're happy to just kind of let Trump overturn it. That to me seems like a massive red alert here.
I'm going to go even farther back in the kind of process and history here and say this. Birthright citizenship never should have been taken up by the Supreme Court in the first instance. And their willingness to take up that type of case shows that there's something deeply, deeply flawed about this current iteration of the Supreme Court of the United States. And the fact that you do have some justices that are like, yeah, maybe we can flirt with this idea now of doing away with an amendment that guarantees birthright citizenship. That is galling and yet not surprising considering the kind of downward spiral we've seen coming from these decisions. I had an incredible conversation with former commissioner of the FTC, Rebecca Slaughter. And, we were trying to reconcile and talk about how, you can keep Lisa Cook's job on the Federal Reserve, at least for now, right? But you can jettison Rebecca Slaughter on the FTC. And really, it's the almighty dollar that is making the world go round. And Federal Reserve is a lot more important than the FTC, although the FTC also deals with consumer protection and other things that deal with Americans at large. And I think to myself that there has been a run made on SCOTUS for powers that are like the Federalist Society, that are Leonard Leo, that are Project 2025. And they have been making all these emergency applications to the Supreme Court at numbers that have never been seen before because they know that they have right kind of for the picking justices that have been waiting in the wings for these types of cases to be teed up for them, which is just kind of the culmination, I think, of decades of long term planning on the other side. And that's why I always tell people things like the overturning of Roe v. Wade through Dobbs was a slow train a coming. It was not something that just happened overnight. And the erosion of civil rights when it comes to voting, when it comes to other incredibly important civil rights issues, we shouldn't be surprised because they have been chipping away at it for years. So it ultimately boils down to voting has consequences. If you're not in a position to make an appointment of a Supreme Court justice because you never got elected into that office, great. Then we're in a better place. If you're not able to sit there and be elected to the Senate and sit on the Senate Judiciary Committee and get judges through and then do successful things like Mitch McConnell, who's still MIA, right? Like, if you're not able to do that because you never got elected to be a United States Senator, then we're in a better place. So I think we always need to be mindful of how we got here. And that is why I look back and I say, they never had to take this case. SCOTUS never had to take birthright citizenship up, but they did. And they're like I said, they're laying in wait for these types of cases to percolate to the top.
And I hope that, like, I've been trying to speak with my audience in a way that's not about admonishing people or shaming people, but just understanding that we would have Roe v. Wade if Hillary Clinton had won in 2016. And there were people who would write to me and who would go, yeah, Hillary and Trump, they're kind of part of the same elite circles, and I don't really think they're that different. And maybe I'll vote, but maybe I'll stay home or I'll write in someone or whatever. We would have Roe v. Wade right now. We would have a stronger Voting Rights Act right now if Hillary Clinton had been president. It doesn't mean that Hillary Clinton is God's gift to progressivism or she would have been perfect or anything like that. But the elections have consequences thing we have to remember, and this was a long time in the making. We knew they were going to go in this direction, and Trump got his three picks, and they did. So I think we should remember that as we think about 2028.
Yeah, and listen, voter complacency, it's not a new concept. I mean, people always find an excuse as to why they won't be activated and engaged. But I think the good news is people have realized they don't have to take it. And part of change comes from learning more and being more active. And I think people are embracing that. And however you define your, active engagement, I don't begrudge you, right? Not everybody goes out in the street and protest. That may not be your jam. But I
Yep.
do think people are caring a lot too, because I spend a lot of time on my channel talking about local and state politics because, yeah, federal politics are important. But what impacts you on the daily basis is whether or not that pothole gets fixed in front of your house and whether your
Right.
kid gets to go to a school where my kid in public school down in Florida, I had to sign a permission slip for her to go to the Scholastic Book Fair because they didn't want to have liability at the Scholastic Book Fair if my kid was, quote, exposed to something like, I don't know, a woke literature. Like the school boards are dealing with that. The people that are elected as governors are dealing with that. Your attorney general, if you're in California, you got Rob Bonta. If you're in Oregon, you got Dan Rayfield. You got people that are fighting for you as an attorney general, regardless of what your party affiliation is. So I am telling people you should pay attention to the stuff that impacts you. And it doesn't mean that you have to take on 20 different causes. Find one that you really care about and lean into it. And you'd be surprised how many more people are also like minded and they share your fears, they share your dreams, they share your anxiety, but they also share your drive to make a difference. And I feel like we're really showing that now. And I find that to be the cool, refreshing part of what we're doing now.
Katie, thanks so much for talking to me. Make sure
Of
to check
course.
out Katie Phang on Substack, Katie Phang News Channel. Let's definitely do this again.
Of course. Thanks for having me. It was so good to see everybody. Thank you.
Take care. Thanks, everybody.